This is Captain E, and I want to tell you about a charity that is near and dear to my heart. The Shawn Jenkins Children's Hospital at MUSC is responsible for saving my niece's life and so many others on a daily basis. Hooked on Miracles is our King Mackerel Tournament in Charleston on July 14th through the 16th, and it's the oldest King Mackerel Tournament in South Carolina. We support the Children's Hospital with 100% of our proceeds. This event is a fun-filled weekend of fishing with family and friends and raising money for this great cause. You can make a difference, too, by going to www.hookedonmiracles.com and join our efforts as a sponsor or participant. That's www.hookedonmiracleskmt.com for all the information. Thanks to all of our sponsors and especially Key West Boats for keeping this great event going every year. We'll see y'all in Charleston in July.
Twisted Tea and Myrtle Beach Wholesaler Better Brands Incorporated know our consumers enjoy relaxing days on the water with Twisted Tea's original hard iced tea in hand. It's important to remember drink and boat responsibly. Choose to be or designate a sober skipper before leaving the dock. Do it for your family and your friends, your passengers, and everyone else on board. Twisted Tea salutes all sober skippers who take the pledge. Cheers, and we'll see you on the water.
Realtree has always had a connection to the fishing industry and the outdoor lifestyle. In 2016, Realtree expanded on the traditional business of creating the world's most effective camouflage patterns to create a fishing brand and family of patterns designed to connect the woods to the water and strengthen the bond between the two worlds. We couldn't be more excited to be working with the industry's top brands, retailers, and anglers to continue our growth, and we hope that you will join us. Enjoy Realtree fishing patterns inshore, offshore, on the lake, or at the dock. Learn more about the extensive line Realtree fishing patterns, apparel, gear, and more at Realtree.com. Trilogy Outdoors.
All right, folks, thanks for joining us once again on Trilogy Outdoors, Beyond the Ink, and the esteemed Senator Stephen Goldfinch and myself, Captain E, are here, and let me tell you about where we're at. We're at CCU. We're hanging out with the one and only Dr. Tom Mullikan, and I tell you what, if you know anything about diving, anything in South Carolina, you've heard the name. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Now, we are in a classroom of students, and it sounds like mostly students in here. Is that it?
So I've gone around the room, English, and I've talked to all of them. I may have missed one that came in late. But, some of these are master's students, Tom. Some of these are graduate students. Some of these are not quite into graduate school, but all interested in conservation, all with different fields. Somebody I talked to earlier had a field in sand tigers, which is certainly interesting to me and some of the things that I've done in the past. We've got some folks that have dived into beach management issues. We've got some folks that have fluid dynamics there on the end. So lots of different diverse fields of study, and going to bring a lot to the conversation. But I am really looking forward to talking with my friend Tom Mullikan, who we go way back and have had lots of projects together over the years. I don't know. I mean, what's the most famous? Has to be flood resilience, yes, sir. I would think. Years ago, I authored, with the help of Tom, I offered the flood resilience bill, which was a major bill for South Carolina, which created the resilience bank, which, by the way, has close to $300 million in the budget this year.
Yes, sir.
We have grown that successfully with the help of Tom Mullikan, who is the chairman of the Floodwater Commission. And I'm just so proud to have a chance to talk to you today and share this with your students. And can everybody hear me okay in the room?
Everybody here, because it's weird with the headsets on.
Yeah,
we got the headsets on, y'all don't, so we don't know if we sound loud enough or whatever. But I think this is keeping right in line with what we started this podcast about.
It's totally right in line.
More than hunting, fishing, it's everything outdoors. And I mean, we just keep getting lucky. We're getting some of the most incredible guests, dude.
We are totally honored and blessed to have a guest like Tom Mullikan. And I have always wanted an educational piece to this, and this fits right in. And so here we are today with Tom Mullikan's class. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Delighted to be here. Honored to be here, and particularly with these brilliant young scientists that cover so much of the waterway, so to speak. So it's going to really looking forward to it, and just want to tell the class that Senator Goldfinch is the leading conservationist. He's introduced the measures that have not only been introduced but made their way into law. We talked a little bit about that, and thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I have been blessed in my life to be able to surround myself with people that are better looking and smarter than I am. And it's not a hard thing to do, as you can imagine, but Tom certainly falls into that category as a friend. And we're going to have a great conversation today because we have so many things. You cross so many boundaries, typical and atypical boundaries. But one of the things that you've really shined on is coastal resource management, floodwater management. I mean, that seems to be something that you're just passionate about. And I want to talk a little bit about that. How did you get into this field of study?
I first started looking at these issues in 1980 when I served on the staff of former United States Senator Fritz Hollings on the NOAA subcommittee in the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee. And honestly, at that point, I didn't know this was something I was going to be getting into, but I realized as I look back that there's only been one sort of thread that's been continuous, and that is my study and my involvement, my enjoyment of the outdoors, and particularly with water.
Yeah.
And a lot of those good times recently being with you, diving all over the world.
Yeah. We have. We actually dove just prior to COVID, I think it was. We dove in the Galapagos together, and that was fantastic. And Tom has, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, you've dove in every ocean, all of the world's oceans.
Yes, sir.
I was trying to figure out how to put that. How do you put that?
Wow.
All of the world's oceans you have dived.
Yes, sir.
Pretty incredible. I've done a lot of diving in my time. That's sort of my, that's one of my favorite things to do, if not my favorite things to do, is spearfish and dive. And have a lot of respect for anybody that has dedicated their life to diving in all of the world's oceans. So certainly not just that, though. You mountain climb as well.
We have about 25 summits and have climbed mountains on every continent. And what really got me involved and interested in that was receding glaciers, which leads us right back to water. And so I've tried to live a life where the things that I talk about are things that I've had personal experience with. And that's what really took me there. I realized that early in my career that I'd studied hard academically and had some wonderful experiences with different people that had been involved with the environment, but I would find myself on the stage with people who had done things. And so about 30 years ago, I dedicated myself to getting out. And it's been a process. The first mountain I climbed of any size was Kilimanjaro.
Wow.
And I remember showing up, and I literally showed up with jeans and like lace-up shoes and a T-shirt and a raincoat, which was fine at base.
Right.
It wasn't so good at summit when it was you're standing on top of a glacier. So it was an experience. I've learned every lesson the hard way and enjoyed every bit of it.
Well, that's how you learn the best of lessons, right? You learn them the hard way.
Yeah.
Your parents always try to tell you, don't do this, don't do that. There's consequences, but you really, truly never learn until you make those mistakes yourself, do you?
You don't have to learn some of those twice, I can tell you. It's a cold night on the summit.
Yeah, there's no education in the second kick of the mule, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, life is about perspective. I mean, to me, that is what life is about. If you don't have perspective, then you really don't know how to communicate effectively with anybody, quite honestly, especially people that look differently or talk differently from you. And you've got the perspective in order to get things done, right? I mean, politics, in my world, politics is the art of the possible, right? I mean, everything is, you have an idealistic view of how things should be. This is the way the world should be. And then here's the way the world is, right? Are we going to meet in the middle? Are we going to fight for the idealistic view? Is the pursuit of perfection going to destroy the good? And that's where you've got to sort of understand yourself, and you've got to understand others, and you've got to understand how to get things done. Are you going to advance the ball a little bit? Or are you going to stand on principle and tell everybody, go to hell? And, everybody approaches things a little bit differently. But the more perspective you have on life, the more places you've traveled, and that's one of the big ways that you gain perspective is to travel. The more places you've traveled, the more things you've done, the more cultures you have gotten involved with, the better perspective you have, and the better you'll be able to approach others, negotiate with others, debate with others, and come up with solutions that work for everybody. So you have the ability to do that.
That is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
That is a great way to put it.
And you've gained those perspectives over the years doing all these fantastic things, and that's why you're able to put together such working groups as the Floodwater Commission.
I appreciate it. That was a big piece of your initiative. And I would say that for those listening, for those in this class, what Senator Goldfinch is talking about is really what separates this state from the rest of the world. And that is we're doing something. And we're not so caught up in the vitriol of talking about out at a philosophical or political level. We're actually doing things that have a marked impact. Some of it may be just one step at a time. But as somebody who remains involved around the world, this state has separated itself. We'll have the greatest percentage reduction in greenhouse gases of any governmental unit in the world. And we're doing that while we're making sure that our economy remains robust. We're dealing with the macro atmospheric issue at the same time we're dealing with the micro manifestations. And what Senator Goldfinch has done is made sure that we are operating in a climate where these changes are welcomed. And as we get out and we build artificial reef, which the Senator's been very actively involved in, he's attended and joined us as we have clean waterways around the state, and he's helped us plant trees and do the things that are making a difference. And that's what we're hoping with this program, Senator, where we have put together, we're bridging the gap between good science and good policy. And what the bridge looks like is getting something done. Yeah. And we realize that we're not going to get it all done today, but as we put bricks in the wall, we are incrementally making progress here while other states and countries aren't. Yeah. And that separates us from the rest of the world.
No, I think you're exactly right. Inglis, were you going to say something?
You think there's any chance we could get him on the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council?
Yeah.
I mean, really, he just sat there and said exactly the opposite of what they live off of.
No, that's exactly right. There's a divide between, in many cases, I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but there seems to be a divide among many in the desire, as I was talking about earlier, the desire to do something for maybe an idealistic purpose, and then common sense. There is some middle ground there. There is the ability to get something done somewhere in the middle, and we here in South Carolina pride ourselves in being able to do that. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned one thing in particular that, I mean, my family has been very blessed in a lot of different ways. And we were able to donate a lot of money to put down the Goldfinch Reef, which now has, I mean, dozens of pieces of structure and ships.
Huge.
It's a huge reef off of South Carolina. But, I mean, that in and of itself has brought multiple benefits to the coast. Tom is following up with a huge project up and down the entire coast of putting structure there. But, I mean, if you think about that as a seed, it's just an example of one thing. That's just a seed. You know, it takes a little money, it takes a little time, it takes a little resource, but that's the seed that blossoms into a tree. The mustard seed that starts this big blossoms into a giant tree. Just that one example that he's talking about, putting reefs down, it's just this big, you know, but at the end of the day, it turns into what's on that wall right there, which is a huge thriving ecosystem. And that's the kind of thing that, you know, we can do in South Carolina if we put our heads together, we work hard, and we're doing that here. And it needs to be carried across the nation. It really does.
I think we are becoming not just the national model, but the global model for action plans.
Yeah.
And you're seeing it, and we're lucky here in that we don't drill for oil and gas. We have a lot of sun, we have a lot of wind offshore, and as we move to more cost-effective forms of energy, set aside the environment. We're also seeing that here in South Carolina, we manufacture electric vehicles. You know, we're making them with Volvo, we're making them with BMW, we're making them with Mercedes. And so as we see this new emerging market, South Carolina has positioned itself as one of the global leaders. And I say these things as if you're not doing all of it, but as we work towards an electric highway, as we put recharging stations in our state parks. Yes, we're reducing our environmental footprint, but we're also building our manufacturing backbone. And so it wouldn't be appropriate for somebody to simply look at us and say we're doing this purely for the environment. The environment is a concurrent objective with economic prosperity, and it's a much more sophisticated calculation. And this state has distinguished itself as being able to find that. And the reason is because of what you're talking about is bringing people together collaboratively, bringing a Big Ten approach to these issues.
Well, let me just give you one thought on that. Okay, 10 years ago, only 10 years ago, I don't believe it would have been possible to bridge the gap between Republican and Democrat, the partisanship divide on climate issues. Okay, 10 years ago, the Floodwater Commission could not have ever been developed or survived. 10 years ago, only 10 years ago, the Resilience Bank, the Resilience Fund that I started with the help of Tom, would not have ever been started in South Carolina. Never. And it certainly wouldn't have ever been slated to have hundreds of millions of dollars put into it. That was a divide that was the size of the Grand Canyon 10 years ago. And today we're doing it, regardless of partisanship, regardless of politics. We're doing it. And I ask you, what's the difference between 10 years ago and today? I mean, there's a few things, okay? But you need to think about what that is, because the next issue that comes along, you're going to have to reflect back on this one and say, why did that work? Why did that work? Because there will be another issue, right? I mean, 20 years from now, we're going to be talking about the damage that solar flares are doing. Or whatever it might be, whatever the issue of the day is, maybe there's a meteorite on the way. I mean, God forbid, right? But there will be another cataclysmic issue on the horizon in the next 2, 3, 4 decades that you'll have to deal with, and you'll have to say, how do we bridge this gap? The way you do it is twofold. You do it with good, clean science that doesn't have bias. And number two, you do it with strong leadership. People that can sell the idea, that can bring others together, that have respect on both sides of the aisle. That's how you do it. Tom is one of those leaders that has been able to do that. And I'm telling you, it would not have happened 10 years ago, Tom, without your help.
Well, I appreciate that. You're being kind. I'm just on the sidelines as a cheerleader. The other piece that the senator leaves out, which is his approach to life, is selflessness. And I think what you've seen as we've taken these issues on with Senator Goldfinch and our governor is that you've seen a level of selflessness that you don't see around the country and around the world. And we say at every meeting when we get together, if this meeting is not built on selflessness, it won't happen, because people come to the table with their own concerns, their own biases, and what it's allowed us to do is put on the table what the objective is. And you couple that with environmental concerns that are more tangible today. This time last year to today, we burned another 7 million acres. This time last year to today, we put another 10 million metric tons of plastic in the water. This time last year to today, the sea level has risen 3.6 inches. This time last year to today, we've had another extreme weather system, more than one. And people see these things, and the point the senator makes about unbiased science and collaboration is what's allowed us to deal with this, rather than just turning this into a taxing situation or whatever, is applying science. And that's really what we're here to talk about, is how to take the science out of the laboratories here at one of the leading marine science institutions in the world and put it into our rivers and put it off our coast. And that's exactly what we're doing. And it is amazing to see it. And I know I continue to stress it, but this is not going on in other places of the world.
Yeah.
They're still debating it, and they're still calling each other names. And so I want to say this because more will hear it. Senator Goldfinch's approach to this is what leadership looks like. Leadership is a manner of handling people, not just because you occupy a post. And what you've done in the way that you approach these issues, allowing others to bring their opinions, is what leadership is, and that's what we need, and that's how we're going to apply the best science that we can come up with.
All right, so for the purpose of our listeners, what's the name of the class you're teaching here?
Just happen to have a syllabus right here.
Oh, there's the syllabus right here.
Coastal and Wetland Policy and Management.
All right. great name. I love it. Obviously, we live here at the beach, but there are people, listening to this podcast that will be listening to this podcast that don't live at the beach. What is coastal and wetland policy? What does that mean to you?
We are the way that we teach this is we are first identifying what are the areas of science that are being investigated by these scientists, and then we're taking that and we're making policy relevant. So that when we talk about policy are the ideas that manifest into laws, and this is what we teach about. We have the laws being a vertical examination, not because of importance, but because of geography, international, federal, state, and local. Oftentimes we have scientists who have great ideas, and those ideas might be better applied through an Horry County ordinance, not an international treaty.
Yeah.
And then we take each one of these areas and we're looking at it horizontally as to what does this apply to, and how do we bring relevance to sharks or to environmental quality lab and those things. So it's not just understanding how to promulgate regulations or pass legislation. It's how to teach our students here to be the most effective in applying for grants and where they might be in it. National Science Foundation, NIH, the other areas, and now with our resiliency office that you help create, how do we create relevancy with our science and use these scientists to drive and apply real-life solutions? So this is the introduction to how to take their scientific examination and make it relevant within policy and law.
Gotcha. So, where does the rubber hit the road? I mean, this is a fantastic, I wish I would have had this in college, and I wish I would have had you as a professor in college.
Me too.
I mean, fantastic, interesting, intellectual on lots of different levels, but where does the rubber hit the road? I mean, when it comes to science and then it comes to policy, they meet somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, how do you get the science to the policy?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you, because it comes up a lot, is like, where do you make it work? And passing it is not enough. So if we're sharks, right? Okay, if we're going to talk about sharks, we kill every year about anywhere, the best number is 80 to 100 million sharks a year. Most of that is utter wanton waste. I don't care what your politics are. When you pull an apex creature into the boat, cut its fins off, and throw it in to drown, nobody much thinks that's a good idea. And there are laws of that. There's law of the sea. We have federal laws that speak to that. But what we find is, so when you're asking where does the metal meet the meat, is in enforcement. And what we find is a lot of these issues that we're talking about here, notwithstanding what we're doing through DNR and some others, but most of these issues, the metal is missing the meat because in much of what's going on internationally, we don't have enforcement capability.
So when you talk about sharks, and the way that I debate my desk mate in the Senate, who's a fantastic guy, his name's Senator Clymer, he's the senator from York, and he'll tell you I'm probably one of the most irritating people in the Senate next to him, and he is just as irritating, I can tell you. I love him to death, but the way that we understand each other's arguments is we point out the fallacies in the arguments, right? I mean, that's the best way. If I know that he's got a good idea, I'm going to tell him it's terrible, okay? And I'm going to tell him why it's terrible, and I'm going to debate him on it. And you know what? I expect the same thing from him. I want him to tell me why my argument's not good. I got an email from, you know who it is, I'm not going to call his name, but a lawyer that works for us in the Senate day before yesterday. I had an idea, I'd proposed an idea, and I said, tell me what you think about it. And he wrote me back and he said, that's a great idea, Senator. And that was it. You know what I wrote him back? I said, that answer sucks. Tell me why it's wrong. Tell me what you don't like about it. All right.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna push back on sharks for a second. I totally agree. Totally agree. There's a lot of sharks being taken out of the ocean. Okay, where are they being taken out of the ocean?
Well, I could tell you where some of the abuse happens because I'm personally familiar with it.
Okay.
Chinese fishing vessels and off the Galapagos.
Bingo.
Where they're going in for where the sharks are mating.
Bingo. Thank you for that. So when people hear, and this is where politics comes into policy. Okay, and I want everybody to hear this. And he answered just the right way. when somebody tells me, for instance, if I'm a partisan, take me out of my body and put me in a partisan. I mean, I am partisan by nature. That's all of us are in some ways, right? But take me out of my body as Senator Goldfinch, put me in Joe Schmo. Okay. If I hear somebody tell me we're spewing carbon dioxide and that's causing climate change, and you got to quit driving your SUV, I immediately think, This is a problem in China. We're doing everything we can in the United States to decrease the amount of carbon in the air. China doesn't care in the least bit. India doesn't care in the least bit. You hypocrite telling me I have to do this, go away. I don't want to hear that, okay? The argument about sharks, same thing, right? I hear 80 million sharks being taken out of the ocean. The only thing that I see when I go scuba diving off the coast of South Carolina is toothy critters that want to eat me and my fish. Okay? So my perspective is a totally different perspective. But when you go dive in the Philippines, when you go dive in Indonesia, sharks don't exist. They don't exist. They have almost hunted them to extinction, right? So the policies that we talk about, you have to tailor them, or the ideas you want to talk about, you have to tailor them in truth and in honesty to the people that you're talking about. You know, if I was to say, we got a real problem with sharks, should I maybe phrase it, the world has a real problem with sharks because of the mass, the eventual extinction of sharks in the Western Pacific or the Eastern Pacific. If I say the world has a problem with sharks, my own personal observations differ from that, right? So that's a great example of how policy meets partisanship, and you got to try to figure out how to overcome those humps, because I run into them every single day in the South Carolina Senate in the same way we ran into problems with floodwater. When we were developing the Floodwater Commission and the resiliency bill, I don't know the last time somebody had a flood in Greenville. I mean, maybe they do. I'm not from Greenville. But we have floods in Socastee and Horry County and Georgetown County and Charleston County every year. It's a common occurrence for us. It's a real problem for us. And you know what? Since it's a real problem for us, it's a real problem for the entire state. But the guy from Greenville or the guy from Cherokee or the guy from Gaffney, whoever, they don't see it like that. And you got to make them see it. You got to make it real for them. This is a problem for the state. It's not just a problem for Horry County. In the same way you're talking about sharks, or you're talking about birds, or you're talking about fluid dynamics, it's got to be real for them, right? I'm sorry, I got on a soapbox.
No, that's good. And we actually started with, when you talk about climate and greenhouse gases and atmospheric issues, we started with that. And, this is not to pick on anybody, but simply to lay down good facts. We talked about since Kyoto Agreement at the top of the geographic vertical continuum, 1997 to today, China's increase is greater than our gross.
Sure.
So the United States could be at zero, and we would have still seen alarming increase.
Right.
And so the problem is, and you raise a very good point, originally in my lifetime, most of the environmental problems that we've addressed have been right here in front of us.
Yeah.
Like when we passed the Resource Conservation Recovery Act for solid and hazardous waste, it was about waste in the back 40. Clean Water Act right here, Clean Air Act right here. And what we're dealing with now are global issues that we need to begin to reshape how the conversation and understanding is, because we cannot solve these problems ourselves. And again, I would say that as we do that, and we don't have a global construct now for climate, there isn't one. And for some of these others, there still has to be some enforcement mechanism, because where you have standards and no enforcement, you don't have standards.
Right.
And the reason why sharks are such a difficult thing, even with fishing vessels into international waters here, is we see overfishing of this. And there are states, Alaska being one, where they have a wonderful statutory scheme on wanton waste. It's just wasteful. I mean, forget that it's an apex creature, it's all these other things. It's just there's no reason to destroy a population of anything wastefully.
Right.
But that all requires enforcement. And so that's why I say, to answer your question, is where we are, and it does require perspective. And that senator from Cherokee County needs to understand now that flooding in Horry County is killing a golden goose, right?
Yeah.
Tourism is still number one economic sector in the state.
Yeah.
And Myrtle Beach is still number one on that list.
It's a huge deal, and you have to figure out, as you're accurately pointing out, you have to figure out how to make it a huge deal for people who aren't directly impacted.
Yeah.
And that goes from climate change to flooding to sharks to everything. If it's important to you, you have to figure out how to make it important to people, even if it's not on their radar right now. Okay? And that's sometimes that's easier said than done. It's easier said than done. It really is.
The great opportunity now is that people are tuned in.
Yeah.
They see it.
People are tuned in now on a level that they've never been tuned in before, and some, quite frankly, to our detriment. There's so much information out there, and so much of it is bad information.
Yeah.
And getting through the bad information to find the good information is a challenge for all of us that truly believe in what we're doing, that truly believe there's a difference to be made. But how do you make it through all the muck to reveal the truth at the end of the tunnel? I mean, just take a quick cursory glance at Facebook nowadays. I mean, I don't have it anymore because of what I'm talking about here. I mean, Twitter, it's just a mess, right? But at the same time, it can be such a useful tool and also such a destructive tool. And you got to work through this environment, which is a really tough environment nowadays, tougher than it's ever been. There was a time when scientists and doctors and even lawyers and politicians, believe it or not, were respected, right? I mean, they were authorities in the world. Can you think? I mean, maybe doctors to a certain extent still, but even now, doctors have the people think, I'm not sure that he's got the best interest at heart, right? Where does all this mistrust of all the people that used to be authorities in the world come from? And how do you get that back? Somebody has to be an authority. I mean, you just have to be, right? I mean, the world doesn't run on democracy. You may love democracy, it's a great idea, but the world doesn't run on democracy. If it did, it would be chaos, right? The world, the United States, runs on a republic, right? That means that we elect people to do what they feel is best for us. I'll tell you a quick story, and Tom, you'll appreciate this.
Yes, sir.
My mentor, who you know, John Napier.
Yeah.
John is a fantastic. He used to be our congressman for the area, and he has the best little quips. The best. I mean, you just can sit around and listen to the guy all day. And he told me one time, I was stressed out about a very difficult vote at the State House, and I was doing everything I could to search for public opinion. I was gathering polls, and I was spending money trying to figure out what everybody wanted me to do, and I was stressed out because it was going to be a very difficult vote. And he looked at me one day, I think we were sitting down at lunch actually, and he sat down with me and he said, Stephen, I want you to think about this carefully. He said, you are the embodiment of 100,000 people. You perfectly embody them. That doesn't mean you're perfect, by no means, right? You perfectly embody 100,000 plus people. Now it's 150,000 people. You perfectly embody them. It's your job to do what you feel is best based on the information you have. And when you no longer embody them, when you no longer represent them perfectly, it's their job to send you home. That's the way this works. He said, don't go chasing public opinion. Relieve yourself of that idea. You are working in a republic. That means you represent people based on the decisions, based on the ideas, based on the research, based on the science, based on all the things that you take in. You represent those people to the best of your abilities. But this is not a democracy. It would never work that way. And that was completely freeing for me in a lot of different ways. It gave me total freedom to act upon what I felt was best and not upon what Joe and Susie and Randall thought I should do. It's what I think's best. And at the end of the day, when what I think is best isn't what they think is best, they need to send me home, and I should be okay with that. I should be okay with that.
That's That's prophetic. Unfortunately, with a lot of people in politics anymore, they don't share your view. The single biggest issue is reelection, not doing the right thing that you've done, taking a stand on these issues.
You can't care about reelection if you're going to do the right thing. I mean, you just can't. It's nice to be able to be reelected so you can continue to do the right thing. But if doing the right thing causes somebody to be unelected, then so be it.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. That's the way it is. Well, anyway, what I wanted, I've gotten off on multiple soapboxes, and we as you know, I tend to do that.
What's new?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, you're a lawyer and a public servant.
Public servant. I like that.
I said it right, didn't you?
You did. He always says politician, and I say public servant.
Yeah.
Public servant.
That's your job. Get on a soapbox.
Yeah, but what I wanted to get into is how this class is going to make a difference in the future of South Carolina and the nation, really. And I wanted to go. I mean, if we can, Tom,
Absolutely.
if you don't mind,
No, I don't mind.
We've got a microphone in the middle of the room. I know everybody started. Oh, look at the.
They're leaning back. Hey, I got a question. How many of y'all from South Carolina?
Look at that.
Hey, that's awesome.
I asked this question at a group I spoke at last night.
Oh boy.
And what was there? It was
three of us. You, me, and one other person.
Out of 50 people at a group I spoke at last night, which was here, 3 people raised their hands and said South Carolina. Hurts my heart a little bit, but I'll forgive you, okay? I'll forgive you.
No, we thank you for choosing coming here for your education, because there's no doubt I'm sitting here going, man, I wish they'd have had this at Francis Marion when I was in college.
Coastal Carolina has really done some amazing stuff over the years. I mean, when I was a kid, this was, sort of like a little community college. And, there was about 2 buildings and a pool. And today, this place is just an amazing hub of intellectual curiosity and thought and research, and I'm really proud of what Coastal has done. Anyway, we have a microphone in the middle of the room. This is the generation of hope that we're looking at right here. Under the tutelage of Dr. Tom Mullikan, I want to know, what are you going to do to change the world? What are you going to do to make the world better? Anybody, go. Look at that.
If it's somebody down on the end, I'll bring the mic a little bit closer to you, so just let me know.
And I don't care what it is. I mean, you can say something completely contrary to my beliefs. That's what the First Amendment's all about. Okay? I may tell you you're wrong because it's my podcast, but at the end of the day, you can say what you want to say. So please do. If you think you've got a project, an idea that's going to change the world, what is it? How are you going to make the world better? Somebody in here does.
Come on, now's a great chance. Come on.
I'll force it if somebody doesn't speak up.
Got a chance to talk to a senior legislator here and offer ideas. What would you say that in applying your science, what would be a desired outcome?
So if I came to you and I said, you got one chance for me to write a bill in South Carolina to support your policy, and let's just assume your research is already done and it supports your hypothesis, you got one chance, an elevator chance of saying, write that bill. What would it be? We need this law. What would it be? No, there's not. There's not, but you can save your little corner. She said if the microphone didn't pick it up. She said, I don't think there's any one law that can save the world, and I think that's right. But you can save your little corner. You can make a difference in your little corner of the world. What's that going to be? If your little corner is the deep ocean bottom, tell me what that is. If your little world is the dune system in South Carolina, tell me what that is. If your little world is the salt marsh, tell me what that is. What is it?
It's a tough question, obviously.
I'll start with Tom.
All right.
That's a good one. That's a good one. He's already doing it, though.
I'm going to give him a chance to think about it while he answers, because I know he can come up with an answer off the top of his head. He's a good lawyer.
I want to say something, though, real quick. I was at Osprey thanks to your invitation when y'all introduced your partnership with Duke, and you got a lot of accolades from a lot of people that got up there to introduce you. It's obvious. It's obvious what you mean to us here, and your work means to the state of South Carolina. I want to tell you thank you.
Well, thank you
on my behalf. But I do want to hear your answer now that you've already done all this work. I saw books. You were holding things this big. I mean, all this work that you've done, the research you've done. Yeah, let's hear it. I want to hear this answer myself.
Well, you gave me a mic and an audience. This could take a while.
Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody better order pizza.
And I also want to thank you for your service.
Yes, sir. Never spent a bad day. With regard to the environment, we have immediate pressing challenges. We are the recipient of manifestations from a global climatic issue, in that we are creating a thicker blanket around Earth that's creating climatic changes that's impacting us in the way of 3 concurrent challenges: extreme weather off the coast, sea level rise, and flooding out of North Carolina from storms coming up through the Gulf. So I think that are you on that conservation bill yet?
Which one? The third? The
Antiquities and Conservation that
yeah,
Chip's going to introduce?
it's like
To double the amount of protected land.
there you go. I was trying to figure out how much it's supposed to be. I think it's a 3rd by 30 or something like that is what they're calling.
The 30 by 30 is consistent with this, but this would double the amount of protected land in South Carolina in roughly 20 years and provide funding. Go back to 25% of every dollar going into the bank to set aside property.
The Conservation Bank and the Resilience Bank.
The Conservation Bank.
Okay, and so we're using the Conservation Bank as a means of acquiring this land.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's a very reasonable.
What I think we need to do in this state is everything we could possibly do through natural resiliency to avoid or to build ourselves to better understand what we need to do for man-made armoring, which hasn't really proven very effective because it's dealing with a moving target, being rising sea level. So what would I do? I would double the amount of protected land. I would create a reservoir or a series of reservoirs in the PD to capture and control the water coming out of North Carolina, which is an appropriation issue. And I would look for ways, so passing a measure, I would have refueling stations for solar in all of our rest areas so that we can then be a world leader. As somebody who represents oil and gas, I'm probably going to get fired, but with solar, to move that because that'll strengthen our manufacturing base. And I think that, we're talking about a couple things. The macro issue is our anthropogenic interference is 69 million metric tons. We're going to reduce it when those 4 coal plants come off by 13 million metric tons. And I think we can continue to reduce that because the utility scale solar is so much less expensive than coal. I would do those things, pass a law, I'd put energy experts on the PSC. Some of what you've talked about with, interpreting our laws, we need people on there that are more expert in very complicated environmental and energy. And I would do those things that I would do what I know you've done, which is take the hard look at smart development.
Yeah.
At Charleston, we're looking at the mayor's proposed a $4 billion heightening of the battery.
A seawall.
Seawall. And
It's a dirty word in South Carolina, but it's true.
And I think that my sense is it'll be obsolete before it's built.
Yeah.
At the rate that we're increasing now. And I think we need to look at how we're going to deal with this. And I hope that you're in the legislature for a very long time because we need runway. But the problem with the issues that we're here to talk about today is this time next year, the problem will not be the same. It's not static. So next year, we're going to be dealing with an issue that's evolved and eroded to a more difficult position. There's nothing that we're seeing where we're plateauing or retarding the issues that are impacting changes here. And so if you ask me to prepare those things, I would have more set aside and more focus on resilience. I would identify where you could control, like y'all don't know this, but Lake Busby, it was his family. That property was given to the state. You know, maybe we use that as a reservoir for controlling and a series of those up the river system, up the basin. And we got to get away from people who think this is like building a new stadium. It's not. It's a very complex, degrading situation where if we don't make the right decisions, our grandchildren are going to suffer because of it. And it's very unusual because most everything that people are used to debating, they think you can put that in a box and come back and next year it'll be the same issue, and it won't be.
Yeah. It's
worse next year.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts on that. Thank you for that. Great answer. And let me preface this by saying I don't like to just curse the dark. I like to light a light at the end of this, but I'm going to curse the dark for a few minutes, okay? So on all of these issues, there are problems, right? I mean, there are problems in accomplishing these issues. There's problems substantively with these issues, although we all sort of know we need to be moving in the direction. And just one example is I don't know what we want to call it, a giant lake, a reservoir, whatever.
Yeah.
Certainly, most of us that understand the flooding issue on the East Coast and specifically here in South Carolina understand we're going to need a reservoir at some point in time to capture and hold water.
Yeah.
If we had the money today, I suspect it would take us 20 or 25 years before a shovel actually got into the ground. For permitting reasons and lawsuits and mitigation and, I mean, you just name it. I mean, by the time the environmentalists ate us alive and by the time we got a permit from the Corps of Engineers, 25 years from now. And the time may have passed, right? I mean, there's always a good time to act, and that's usually now, right? But, I mean, there are significant problems with tackling these issues, and they usually start with inhibitors that have been put in our way in a permitting fashion, in a regulatory fashion, maybe even a statutory fashion. Yeah. The second thing, so I heard you say solar, and I'm a big fan of solar. But as you know, the Chinese, in a lot of ways, are taking over most of the rare earth minerals. I mean, they have just about taken over. I mean, they've colonized Africa. I mean, if anybody been in here, been to Africa lately? You have? Where'd you go?
South Africa.
Okay, so in South Africa, it's not quite as bad. East Africa and Northern Africa, the Chinese have truly colonized the area, and they're mining everything. They're building roads, they're building bridges, they're putting infrastructure in exchange for mass amounts of mining. Rare earth, Afghanistan, the Chinese are there eating up the rare earth. Cobalt, lithium, the Chinese are there digging it up. So when we're talking about battery storage, battery power, solar panels, all things we know we're going to have to go to eventually in the future, the Chinese are a decade ahead of us. And eventually, if we have policies that support that or move us in that direction or mandate that we're in that direction, are we going to be at the beck and call, I mean, really at the end of the stick? I mean, I wanted to say something stronger than that, but I mean, we are going to be at a severe disadvantage to the Chinese. Yeah. How do we deal with those issues?
Well, so you identified energy as being a priority, and I think the best way for us to deal with it is put energy in all forms on the table, right? We were very close, but for some very bad decisions of having another 2,100 megawatts in Fairfield County.
Yeah.
We have the highest nuclear per capita of any state in the country, and we have and the highest concentration of nuclear engineers in the country.
Yeah.
In South Carolina. We could build those reactors if it were done right, and it should have been done right. So we have nuclear, we have we have wind, we have enough wind to displace the grid coming off the coast, off tall tower off the coast. We need to have an informed. I'm probably going to regret saying this, but since we're having this conversation, you got to put energy experts on the PSC if you expect expertise to come out of it.
I've heard you say it twice, and I realized it the first time.
Yes, sir.
I got it. I agree with you, by the way.
Yeah,
so please continue saying it.
Well, it's very different than what it was, and it ties into other things that we've talked about. We're going to see distributed power is going to impact how power is transmitted and distributed. It's not a system anymore where we're just trying to figure out how to electrify the rural areas. And what Santee Cooper and the co-ops did is incredible. But now you're going to see companies that are using 120 megawatts are going to have energy on site. And if we could be the leader in South Carolina, because you asked what can we do here? There's no reason in South Carolina for us to have to go to MIT or Berkeley or someplace to talk about storage. And it's not going to be lithium batteries. It's going to be different types of storage. And the person that cracks the code on the cost of storage or the entity is going to be leading the world, because we all know that when we can put in situ alternative energy and cost-effective storage, the entire grid is going to look different. So here, that may be with nuclear. We still have the footprint for it, and modular nuclear with storage. And that's the kind of informed conversation that we need to be having in this state. And so, and also recognizing exactly, I like solar. It's generating at about a penny a megawatt, where coal is 3.2 cents. But nuclear, it competes over the course of the lifetime of the reactors. We need to be, and I'm a little bit older, Senator, than you are, like in your professional lifetime, these issues are going to manifest. Sure. Right? It's Chinese, and that's an important topic. It's not race baiting, and it's not denigrating. The optics in China are this. We look at China and we think they're trying to claim a position on the world stage. China looks at it as they're trying to reclaim their position as the world leader.
Right.
And they're doing what they have to do with little consideration for the environmental impacts of what they're doing. And we need to understand that, and we need to create strategies. I would say the great opportunity you have is most of these issues are best dealt with at a state level. Yeah. Energy independence. We ought to be a net energy exporter, and we could be. If we'd have gotten that 2,100 megawatts at summer 2 and 3, we'd be in a very different position today. Yeah. And so energy we need a sophisticated, actionable plan for energy. And, I say this and I apologize. We need to be a world leader in energy, and we can be. Yeah. So go ahead.
No. I think you're right on track. What has irritated me the most about this discussion over the years is that everybody knows, most people know what the solution to net zero is. Most people know that nuclear is truly the solution to our carbon problems. But yet, the world in and of itself has made it so expensive to produce a nuclear power plant in a safe way. I mean, we could certainly do it cheap the way some other countries have done it, and they suffer the consequences of it. But the world has made it so expensive to produce a nuclear reactor at a reasonable cost. It's made it so difficult to produce it at a reasonable cost that we're in a situation now where we've got 2 giant holes in the ground and no reactor. Yeah. Because the last estimate that came from that debacle was approximately $30 billion to finish that project. Okay, and you just can't come up with that money. It just doesn't exist. I mean, not here. So how do you get to the solution when it is so far out of reach, right? I mean, The same thing applies, and I'm going back to solar. Solar's great. It's a great solution, other than the fact that it takes up so much land. I mean, if you compare, a natural gas plant or even a nuclear plant, I mean, how much was the nuclear plant? 1.2?
1.2.
How many acres of solar would it require to get 1.2? I mean, you might not know that off the top of your head.
Yeah, I think it's 5 acres it's 5 acres per megawatt.
I can't do the math.
So if we're talking about 1,200 megawatts, we'd be talking about. You're talking about an enormous field. Yeah. I mean,
1,200 times 5, is that right?
Yeah.
6,000 acres of land. 6,000 acres of land
For one reactor.
For one reactor, right? And it wasn't even a big one. I mean, then you talk about what goes into that, and again, we come right back to China owns almost all the rare earth now that goes into the solar panels. And one day we're going to be beholden to them because of that. You run into problems at every angle, but you know what? If you're going to be a leader, you got to figure out ways around those problems. You got to push through them. You got to figure it out. We know where we need to go. How do we get there? Y'all sitting around this table, y'all have to be part of that solution, right? I mean, Tom and I can't do it on our own. I certainly wouldn't count on the guys in the federal government doing it on their own. Y'all have to be part of the solution. It's incumbent upon you as the next generation to figure these things out, to figure out how to do nuclear cheaper, to figure out how to get around the rare earth problem that, is truly going to be a problem that comes down the line. And by the way, something that always has interested me that I'd like your opinion on. So we're all running around these issues. We're all sort of trying to tackle these issues and thinking about these issues. And I've always thought there's an issue out there that none of us are even thinking about. Now, I'm not going to even identify it, but I said a couple things earlier, right? Anybody in here an expert on the sun? What's that? Well, there's something beyond a solar flare, and it's back in, I think, 1919, there was a reaction in the sun, and I can't remember the actual name of it, but it was so powerful that you had the northern lights in the equator, and it destroyed anything mechanical. I mean, just destroyed it. Okay, and that happens every couple hundred years. If we had one of those today with every microchip, with this thing, with your watches, with your cars, if we had that same solar event today, the world goes black. And it happens on a regular basis, right? I mean, every 200 years, it seems like a lot to y'all, but it's not a lot in the grand scheme of the world. I mean, have you ever looked at the frequency of asteroids hitting the Earth? I mean, that's a really scary thing but everybody says, it's never going to happen. You ever looked at the frequency? I mean, we come close every single year. We're a hair away. I mean, just a couple of years ago, we had a asteroid that was 800 meters wide pass within 23,000 miles of Earth. That was an eighth of the distance between us and the moon. You know what an 800-meter asteroid would do to the Earth? That's one of those civilization killers. I mean, it's over, right? I mean, it would take out the size of Texas. It literally put a hole the size of Texas into the world. So, and it's traveling at 40,000 miles an hour, by the way. If I take a bullet, you ever seen a bullet? I take a bullet and I throw it at you. Anybody ever heard of Randall Carlson? Really interesting guy. I've heard a couple of his lectures, and he always says this. I take a bullet. It's only this big, the size of your thumb, let's say, people that are listening. And I throw it as hard as I can throw it at the guy sitting across from me. It's going to sting, right? But it doesn't break the skin. It doesn't really hurt. I take that bullet now and I speed it up to 3,000 feet a second, which is what a lot of rifles would do. It's got to do a lot of damage, right? What if I take an 800-meter asteroid and I speed it up to 40,000 miles an hour? 40,000 miles an hour. You just can't imagine the devastation that this world has undergone in the past, and it will happen again. You think the ice sheets are melting fast now. Do you know what happens when you put an 800-meter asteroid in the middle of an ice sheet? I mean, there are places out west. There are places out west where they have literally mapped the rivers from an asteroid that hit an ice sheet. They've literally mapped the rivers. You can see them in the ravines, 400 feet deep, 8 miles wide. And they have figured out that those rivers, in order to cut that ravine, were going 50 miles an hour. 400 feet deep, 8 miles wide, 50 miles an hour. Can you imagine? You can't. I mean, you just can't imagine the amount of water. You know how you get that amount of water? An asteroid, right? So, I mean, it's just one example or two examples of things we're not even talking about, right? We're talking about the Earth getting hotter. How much has the Earth? You might not know the answer to that. I don't want to put you on the spot. I've heard that seawater has risen 8 inches in the last 20 or 30 years.
3.6 inches last year.
3.6 inches sped up last year. 8 inches in the last 20 or 30 years. You know how much sea level rises if we have an asteroid? Doesn't matter.
Nope.
Right? It doesn't. Nope. The answer is it doesn't matter. We're not even talking about that. Bingo. Why would we? Well, you might be able to. You might be able to. Okay, so for those of you who can't hear, what I just heard was we can't do anything about the asteroid, but we can do something about sea level rise. What do you think 100 years ago somebody would have said if I said we can stop sea level rise? 100 years ago. I think they would have said we're out of our mind.
Yep. Senator, somebody behind you.
I kind of have a comment on, hopefully this goes to what you're talking about, but do you not think that part of the problem here is that everyone is saying, well, it's up to I'm not disagreeing with you, it is up to the next generation, but everyone's kind of has the mindset of, I don't have to deal with it right now, it's not a problem right now, so why do anything about it?
Yeah.
That's, in my opinion, I think a large part of the problem. Everyone's kind of putting it off.
Kicking the can down the road.
So what the young lady was saying is that everybody's kicking the can down the road, and
Great question.
We're passing the buck to the next generation. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't deny that at all. And a lot of times that's because people feel like they've been fighting the fight, and it's time for somebody else to fight the fight. You know, I mean, just quite frankly, you spend 20 years doing what I do, and eventually you throw up your hands and you say, somebody else's turn.
Right, and I can't even imagine. But I think part of science can hopefully try to get ahead of the problem.
Yeah.
In some cases.
No, I think that's exactly right. You want to get ahead of the problem. And you got to have leadership to do it. And you got to have good ideas to do it. And you got to have science to do it.
I agree with you. I think that the challenge for this generation is in applying, which goes back to why we created this program, is that each of these issues are very complex in their own right. And what the students don't understand is I rarely talk to a public official that has the breadth that you do on these issues. So we're not really even having an informed conversation. And that I was going to read you language out of this case we were looking at for today, which we've got bad science now manifesting itself into U.S. Supreme Court cases. It's manifestly wrong, and most people would agree that it was wrong. So we have a huge education process, and we need to start relying on, go right back to where you started, unbiased science being applied in a very strategic fashion. Yeah. And that's the great challenge for us, because these are very complex issues, whether it's energy, whether it's reducing one of the sources of greenhouse gases, whether it's dealing with the science of responding to the manifestations. All of these things is very difficult to have an informed opinion on that. And we need our government institutions to understand that and also bring people along. People need the kind of selfless leadership that you've demonstrated. We've got to bring people to the table, because you won't do it. To answer the question, I'll go back and say, what laws do we need to apply? We probably don't need a whole lot new. What we need is people understanding and embracing what we have, because we could do this without passing a whole lot of new laws. We need to have smarter development. We need to, just the people you and I have taken out on dives. Think of the coral reef that people kill just on recreational dives.
Dropping acres.
Because they just don't know it, right?
Yeah.
You got a question behind you, Senator.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, so the question was, do the laws we have today not have enough enforcement to make a difference, I guess, enough teeth in them? I think that question was posed to you.
Okay, yes, sir. I think absolutely in some instances. You know, and I can tell you that from firsthand. I told you, 40 CFR, these regs for RCRA were passed en banc in total with the Republic of China and parts of the People's Republic of China. When I went there, they have them, they don't even know what's in them. So if you asked them, do we have laws pertaining to hazardous waste, they would say yes. But the question, the more appropriate question is, are they enforcing those laws? And that answer is absolutely no. Do we have laws that deal with international fisheries on sharks? Yes. Do we have an enforcement mechanism that's enforcing? The answer is no. So, and that's a lot of what we need to do in terms of education and creating enforcement mechanisms that are effective. It's not true in all instances. We have many, and particularly our state statutes and regulations, that are vigorously enforced through DHEC. But there are instances, particularly the higher you get up on that food chain and the further you get away from the flagpole, the more opportunity there is for avoiding that enforcement. Does that answer your question? So it's a more surgical examination of what standard are we talking about.
I think that's a fantastic point. All right, we're coming to a close here, and I'm going to give y'all another chance. 1 million people are going to be listening to this podcast next week. You have a chance to be famous. Take your chance now. What do you want to change?
I wish we'd had her question on the mic.
We got a couple comments now.
All right, walk up and grab a mic so we can get it real good.
Step up here and just talk into the mic for us.
You can pick it up, pull it right out of that thing, and talk into it. There we go.
Like based off what I just said, I'd probably create a law that creates more funding for the enforcement of these policies, and like grants them the ability to actually enforce the laws themselves.
Okay, great.
User fee.
User fees. Yeah, user fees.
I'll take
All right, who's next?
Down here. There we go. Come on over.
You want to tell us your name? You can. You don't have to if you don't want to.
My name is Derek Thorne. I'm a master's student here at CCU, and I would come up with more economically feasible ways to implement the policies that we have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Derek.
Yep.
Who's next? I think it's that.
Anybody else?
Nobody wants to be famous? You don't want your research funded for the next 10 years?
Come on, remember, this man will be voting on it.
Some wealthy benefactor is just waiting to hear your idea. Oh.
Save the watershed.
Save the watershed? What do you mean? Come on up. Come on up.
I don't want to be famous, but
You're already famous. She was out of
I
school.
think you got to work on the development. An increase in population, we're just going to keep on development.
She says we have to work on the development, the watershed. I think that's a fantastic point. That's something that's near and dear to my heart, as you know, and something that's near and dear to your heart, Tom. I spent, I don't want to exaggerate, but I spent a good 24 months of my life understanding that problem and created a new agency in South Carolina because of that problem, dedicated to that problem. And so I'm with you. Office of Resilience. Look it up.
Yep.
It's a good thing. And it's a great idea.
So I'm really passionate about water quality.
Keep going. It's the mic. Something's wrong with it there. It's not you. Hang on one second.
We're picking you up a little bit. It's just that mic's a little squeaky.
Keep going. You're good.
Good now.
Yes, you're good. Go ahead.
So I'm really passionate about water quality, and I just think it's something that needs to be, more people need to be educated on the fact that even if you're not, let's say, a resident on the coast, because of watersheds and how the water runs into the systems, you can be out west in an area, or let's say you're part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, you're living in southern New York, and your pollution is affecting, Virginia. So, more people need to be aware of kind of what's going on and what kind of water quality means, stormwater runoff, agriculture runoff, urban runoff, and how these different developments and fertilizers and things are affecting those waterways and how it affects not just, the actual quality of the water, but biological impacts in the water, and then therefore your fishermen, and kind of a whole cycle of everything. So I just think that's a really important parameter that needs to get a little more focus.
You familiar with the water quality project Merle's Inlet's doing? Yeah, you should look that up. Merle's Inlet's got a really good water quality project. It's actually, I think it's well, they do a volunteer monitoring system, but I think all the testing's done here at Coastal.
Yeah, I work with the environmental quality labs for the testings. I'm working with the peers out in Apache and Cherry Grove that collect the water quality.
So the question is, why is that not done everywhere?
That is a great question.
Right.
And
Just keep talking.
sorry.
Keep talking. I'll hold it.
Oh, okay. And one of the things that I was kind of like important too is just that, you know, there are multiple different parameters that are used for water quality, not just the level of bacteria, but also looking at like oxygen and pH and turbidity and things that aren't really looked at as a whole kind of cohesive unit. And so a lot of times, even if testing's done, it's strictly either E. coli or things like that. And there are more things that are affecting the system than just, you know, looking at how much bacteria is in the system. There are other things that that take part in that. So I think that's a really big thing that needs to kind of be spread, you know, to other people, that, you know, it's not just, oh, we look at how much bacteria, that'll tell us if it's a, you know, healthy system or not. There are definitely other things, you know, low oxygen, that's going to start killing your fish and things in there. So it's not just one parameter. You need to look at it as a whole cohesive unit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one example of what you're talking about, but the red tides in Florida have just been getting worse and worse and worse. And that fishery has, you know, in some places, very isolated places, but in some places have been decimated because of that. And a lot of that has been pinpointed to runoff from particular farms that are in those areas. And, you know, when you pump enough fertilizer into the estuary, that kind of thing happens. So, yeah, I'm totally with you. I think that's a great idea as well. What else? Come on up here and talk into his microphone if you don't mind.
Here, sorry.
You going to talk about sharks?
A little bit.
Oh, good.
I think from a fisheries perspective, identifying and protecting nursery habitats for keystone species for these healthy ecosystems, because, you know, we all like to eat fish, very important to our economy. So I think research that first identifies these critical habitats and then protects and enforces how we may protect the species that are occupying these habitats. So.
All right, you're about to get me on a soapbox. You ready?
Oh, I love it. Get on it. I don't know how to get you one. What's your name?
Era McClanahan.
Era? Okay, thank you for your comment. I could talk about that for days and days and days, but I'll give you one example of really fisheries mismanagement that is going to create problems for nurseries like you're talking about, okay? And that is the ongoing saga of the red snapper. Anybody following this problem? So 14 or so years ago, the federal government concludes that red snapper is being overfished. It has been overfished. It's being overfished. And they decide to close it, okay, in the South Atlantic area. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. Closed red snapper completely. Today, there are places that have nothing but red snapper. I mean, they have literally snapper, as you can imagine by the name. They eat everything out of house and home. They have gotten so thick in the offshore places where they're supposed to live that they've started pushing themselves inshore farther and farther and farther. Nobody in South Carolina that I know of, I don't know about you, but nobody in South Carolina that I know of has ever caught a red snapper in state waters until this year, or maybe last year was the first time I heard about it. This year, we heard of a red snapper being caught at the Merle's Inlet jetty, right off the beach.
10-pounder, not a baby, not a juvenile.
Not a juvenile, 10-pound red snapper being caught at the jetties. Now, y'all might not immediately, if you're not a fisherman, you might not immediately understand the impact of that, but these are voracious eaters. And when they're encroaching on inshore fisheries and nurseries, they will eat everything out of house and home. They've done that offshore already. The black sea bass population is about gone because of the overpopulation of red snapper. Now, do you know why the federal government says we still can't catch them? because we're catching too many of them. There's nothing, you can't catch anything else but a red snapper. We catch too many of them, and their mortality is too high. So we went from having not enough of them to having too many of them, and we're killing too many, and that's why we can't catch them now, according to the federal government and their mismanagement of our species. So one of the other problems that we have, there's two different sampling models for how to sample the red snapper. Okay, there's a hook and line captain's choice, and there's what's called a chevron trap. When you think of a chevron trap, think of like a glorified crab trap. Okay, the holes in the side of the trap are about that big, yay big. Okay, and what I'm pointing out, what is that? About the size of a volleyball, Inglis? Okay, a hole about the size of a volleyball. The chevron trap is what's used for Beaufort NOAA. For NOAA Beaufort, Station Beaufort. That's North Carolina, okay? Yeah. The Beaufort NOAA controls the South Atlantic. That's North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. NOAA Miami controls the Gulf, okay? The Gulf section. NOAA Miami uses a hook and line captain's choice. NOAA Miami has identified in their sampling and their modeling that they have an abundant number of mature red snapper. And guess what the Gulf has done? They've opened up a season for red snapper. NOAA Beaufort, which uses the glorified crab traps with the holes about yay big, says there aren't any mature red snapper in the South Atlantic. You know why? Because a 30-pound red snapper won't swim into a hole the size of a volleyball, into a crab trap, essentially, a glorified crab trap. Myself, Senator Campson, Congressman Rice, and Congressman Duncan wrote NOAA Beaufort a letter urging them to change their modeling system to the hook and line's captain's choice. Just try it for a year, and let's see if it changes the model at all. They told us no. They told 2 state senators and 2 congressmen, no, we're not going to do it. And so today we're stuck with overpopulation of red snapper that are literally eating the reefs to death. That's federal mismanagement. That's something y'all have to fix at some point in time. I'm working on it right now, but that's going to be y'all's problem in the very near future. Hey,
Did you mention your bill already?
I haven't mentioned my bill. So in my irritation in this, I've drafted a bill which will allow for red snapper fishing in South Carolina state waters. Now, the federal government is going to get angry at that, and they're going to say, we're going to take away your annual catch limit in federal waters. Well, that's fine because we don't have one, okay? We get 1 weekend a year to fish for red snapper, and that's usually right in the middle of the windy season when nobody goes fishing. So take that annual catch limit away. When a red snapper steps, figuratively swims into state waters, it's going to be one step away from the dinner table in South Carolina because, to me, that's very similar to an invasive species. Not supposed to be there, eating everything out of house and home. It's like the lionfish population. I mean, it's just exploded over the years. Yes, sir.
Could we not have South Carolina DNR release like a nuisance species for them? Like release them as a nuisance species? And we treat them like lionfish where we like give, like, people catch so many, we pay them a certain amount per fish or something?
Yeah, so the question is whether or not DNR would treat them as a nuisance species, and so I would like to think that DNR would do that. DNR traditionally follows federal guidelines.
I didn't know, like, because each state has their own. I didn't know if we went on our own policy.
So we do. DNR's natural response, their immediate response, is always to follow the federal guidelines. Only when common sense comes into play, and I determine that we need to do something different, is when I can override DNR with legislation, with statute, which is what this bill is. If it becomes law, it's a statute, and it will override any regulation or policy that DNR has. Okay. What else? Anybody else want to talk about anything?
The main thing I want to throw in something real quick, science being separate from sport as far as fishing. I'm a fisherman. I'm not the scientist, and I had 4 wonderful freshman years in college, but I did. But the fact of the matter is, normally the outdoorsmen like you and me, we take the best care of the resources. I don't care if you're a biologist, no offense, marine biologist, whatever. You and I take the best care of the resources. We care about it. We genuinely care about it. We aren't able to do it in the capacity that y'all will be and are. And that's why, I'm going to say the same thing Stephen said. Y'all are the future of it. You're the future of taking care of the resources for my grandchildren and for your children and everything else. But I promise you, if you need help from me, I'm here to help you. I'll do whatever I can, but I can't do as much as this man and this man do because they do incredible amounts. I'm kind of lucky to be hanging out with him all the time and to finally get to meet Dr. Mullikan. But we as outdoorsmen and sportsmen probably care about the resources as much, if not more, than anybody else.
Well, you wanted to be there for the next generation. And by the way, I mean, look who pays. You're going to get me on another soapbox. I'll try not to keep.
Don't worry about it, buddy. You're at an hour and 20. These guys are all probably like, all right, it's Friday. Let's go.
Somebody has to pay for all of the management, right? I mean, anybody familiar with Magnuson-Stevens? I mean, Magnuson-Stevens is an act that's responsible for the federal fisheries.
Really?
Yeah, I mean.
Wow.
You're not familiar with that?
No, but I'm saying as a marine biology, how many people are marine biology majors in here?
Yeah, so maybe not.
That's
yeah.
Okay. I'm just.
Yeah, so a couple of them are
getting to that.
I know it.
Are familiar with that. But I mean, same thing. Federal duck stamp, as far as duck hunters go. Federal duck stamp. Where do you think all the money goes for the conservation of the lands for the ducks? Comes from the federal duck stamp. The fishing stamp, the fishing licenses. Coastal Conservation Association, which is a fishing organization. I mean, these are the groups, these are the mechanisms by which money gets pumped into the system for conservation. Okay, so hunters and fishermen are an essential part of this mechanism. Whether you like it or not, they're an essential part of the mechanism if you believe in conservation.
That's right.
Okay, so we have talked forever.
Yep.
Inglis, you had something to say?
No, I was just, whenever you let me know. We're at an hour and 20.
Okay. Well, I'm ready.
You know, Meat Eater goes 2 hours and a half. I don't mean.
Oh, I'm not. Yeah.
Come on, dude.
Yeah, we can go for another 2 hours, no problem.
Easily with this crowd. Y'all are awesome. Y'all been awesome.
Well, I want to thank Tom Mullikan, a great friend, a patriot, a statesman.
Thank you, sir.
True statesman. And honored to have you on the podcast today.
We're honored to have you in our classroom today.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
all you do.
Thank you so much. And thank all of y'all for participating. You were a great sport.
Hey, I'll tell you what, this has been another incredible episode of Trilogy Outdoors. Trilogy Outdoors Podcast is a product of Trilogy Outdoors Media. All views and opinions of our hosts and guests are not necessarily those of our sponsors. Trilogy Outdoors is produced and edited by Trilogy Outdoors Media. Be sure to follow us on all the podcast platforms as well as our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also, don't forget our other brands, Southern English Radio Show and Walk 'Em All Outdoor Magazine. To find more information, visit TrilogyOutdoorsMedia.com. And remember, if it's anything dealing with fins, fur, and feathers, you're going to find it right here on Trilogy Outdoors.